Hey everybody, welcome back to BellTube. Normally here at the beginning of May, I'd be talking about everything I read in the month of April. That said, the end of March was pretty terrible for me and for my family. We very unexpectedly lost my mother. And so I really didn't feel like reading anything almost the entire month of April. However, I did manage to read one book, and we're going to talk about it today, and that is Tress of the Emerald Sea. And not so much of a book review is what we're going to do here, but I want to talk about what kind of meaning I found in it. So you're not going to run into any spoilers. I just felt like this was an important video to make. That said, I think before we get into that, we need to do something we haven't done around here in quite some time. If you are a regular viewer of the channel, you know what that is. We need to roll that intro. Okay, so welcome back. Here's the thing. I'm going to try to do this today with as little editing as possible. I just don't really have the brain space yet, but I still wanted to make a video for you guys. And so we are going to talk about my honest thoughts on Tress of the Emerald Sea. I did prepare some notes, so if you do see me occasionally look down at them, that's why I'm doing that. This book was exactly what I needed at the right time for me. The tone of Tress of the Emerald Sea is very warm. And if you've been following the channel, you know, I've been reading all kinds of books with all kinds of tones. And what I had scheduled to be reading was actually book, I want to say 6, The Bone Hunters and the Malazan Book of the Fallen. That was not the right tone for what I needed. Suffering, definitely the worst episode of grief I've ever had, and I think most people will probably ever have, and that's losing your mom. So the tone of Tress is very warm, it's very inviting, it's very cozy, and it kind of felt like being wrapped into a story more than just kind of being thrown into a battle. And for me, that's really something that I needed. I emotionally resonated with this book in a way that I haven't with anything in a really long time. This book was very calming to me, and as I understand it, this was the first secret project that Brandon Sanderson wrote during the pandemic. Now, yes, it was 5 years ago, but as you'll recall, when the pandemic hit, everybody was just, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if it was kind of a hoax. We didn't know if a lot of people were going to die. There was a lot of uncertainty in the world. And this book, I think he maybe just wrote it. I think he might have even written it for his wife. Has a real calming effect, and you can tell based on when he wrote it, sort of the intention that he had in his mind was to really provide a calming resource, if not for all of us, then at least for his own personal immediate family as they navigated and as we all navigated through those really uncertain times. So the tone is really good, and the emotional resonance of calm is excellent. This book is hopeful, it's gentle, but it's also really meaningful, and it does carry some pretty good themes. One thing that I really appreciated about Tress is that it didn't ask that much of me as a reader, but it gave a lot to me. And what I mean by that is it didn't throw out a bunch of language that I was unsure of. It didn't have so many complicated threads moving through this intricate story that required a lot of brain power. No, what it really did for me is it just gave me almost like a warm hug that only kind of a cozy, intimate story can do, even though I would not consider this necessarily cozy fantasy. It's definitely adventure fantasy, but just kind of the tonality of it gives it that real gentle feeling. Now, without spoiling anything here, I just want to talk about Tress for a second as a main character, because we get this girl who is born on an island, and yes, this is, you know, taking place in the Cosmere, so when someone says they're born on an island, we don't really know if it's an island or not. It could just be a landmass, and that's what we really have here. But she's curious, and she's fun, and she's maybe got some adventure in her spirit, maybe not. We don't know until the call for adventure comes up, when this guy that she likes named Charlie is sent off to sea and doesn't come back, and she really goes on a quest to go find him and, you know, rescue him from this sorceress that seemingly has captured him. So I think that where we start with Tress is where we start with a lot of us, almost even in urban fantasy sometimes, where we're in this situation and there's an inciting event. I'm telling you, I'm not going to edit this much. There's an event that challenges us and sparks us to, heights that maybe we hadn't really thought we could accomplish. So Tress goes off and she gets on a boat, and, I'm not going to give you the whole, the plot synopsis here, but she does uncomfortable things for herself to try to accomplish something that's very important to her. And I really, really like that. The other part about this book that worked so well for me was the narration. Now, this book is third-party narrated, and it's narrated by Hoid, sometimes known as Wit in the Cosmere. So that happens to be my favorite character in all of Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere is Hoid, and he does this so expertly, where we get a lot of the cleverness out of the narrator, where he's talking about himself, or maybe he's talking about other worlds in the Cosmere, just kind of hint, wink, wink, nod, nod, hint, hint kind of a thing, as a direct nod to us breaking the fourth wall a little bit, to the reader, but yet still delivering that same kind of calming, cozy resonance and atmosphere that this book really requires. And so I find that when Brandon Sanderson intentionally goes out to be funny, it doesn't often work. However, when he goes into character and he becomes Hoid, a lot of the day-to-day clever things that he says are really funny. And that's kind of a confusing thing for me as I read Brandon Sanderson books, because there are plenty of characters, particularly like in Mistborn Era 2, where you can just tell he's trying to be funny. Or in parts of Wind and Truth, you can tell he's trying to, make jokes, and they don't land very well. In this, he's just kind of being himself. He's just being Hoid. He's being Wit. And it worked. It worked extremely well for me. And I found myself smiling really for the first time in weeks. Now, this is not a long book, right? It's only 300 and some pages. It took me the entire month to read. That said, I didn't even pick it up till halfway through April. But still, when I got to the Hoid, Hoid's in all of it really, but when he would talk to us directly as the reader, I could not help but to smile, and that's something that I really appreciated. The world building, it's Cosmere, so there's going to be some hard magic. That was probably my least favorite aspect of this entire book. I didn't really care for this spore system and the spore handling in the aether. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers here. This was probably my least favorite magic system of the Cosmere, but I wasn't reading this book for the magic system. It was totally extra. It didn't matter to me. I understood what kind of and how it worked, but it didn't really matter to me. Like allomancy, I love allomancy. I think it's super cool. Stormlight, I think, is a little bit more murky, because I'm not so sure anybody who's not a Sanderson scholar could truly explain how Stormlight works in all of its different, forms. But this one, I don't know. It didn't matter, though. She works with vines, and she can control trees, and she can control these spores. And that's really all we need to know, and it moves the story along. This book, for me, when we talk about thematic depth, I want to say that it balances adventure and imagination with introspection, but none of it in too heavy-handed of doses, right? It's not just all action adventure. It's not. But it's also not all navel-gazing, where Tress is, contemplating her place in the Cosmere or anything like that. It was really kind of equal parts adventure and a little bit of introspection and a little bit of wonder and this little bit of magic. And then we get Hoid, and Hoid is a character in the book, without ruining it, that is also quite good in, measured doses that they throw him into, or that Sanderson throws him into. So I just think that the recipe for this book thematically really balanced out pretty well. It talks about courage, it talks about kindness, there are deep themes about believing in yourself, but not in a preachy way. And, authors can get kind of heavy-handed about, how we should live our lives. And again, to reference Wind and Truth, I found that book entirely preachy in sections. And I know a lot of you guys found, my channel in the first place from the Wind and Truth video that I did, and why I only gave that book 3 stars. I'll put a card right here if you have not seen my review of Wind and Truth. It's very middling, to be, kind on the nice side. But what's interesting to me is that he actually wrote Wind and Truth after he wrote this book, which seems like a downslide to me because this was very good. This book, again, thematically, felt like a comforting voice that I needed to hear right now, saying that everything is going to be okay. That is kind of the message that I got out of this book, and I keep, holding it. I don't know. It's just, like I said, it's kind of like a cozy blanket. So who should read this book? And, when should you read this book? I think this book is really good for readers who don't need a deep dive into very intricate plots, but are looking for a book that might bring you some hope and maybe just kind of a break from the everyday epic scope of big fantasy or epic space opera or hard sci-fi or crime fiction or whatever other genres that you read. If you're looking for an adventure book that's full of fantasy but full of hope and not preachy, that is a great time, to get into this book. I also happen to think that Tress of the Emerald Sea is a great entry point for Brandon Sanderson. Now, I know it's just kind of this one-off secret project, right? And we've been told a million times, you start with Sanderson at Mistborn, right? That's where you really, sure, you could go back to Elantris if you want, but Mistborn is really kind of where the Cosmere takes off. There's been plenty of people that think Warbreaker is a place to start, and, I don't disagree there. Warbreaker, for me, is a 5-star book. So this one, I think, for the people that want some adventure with hope, is an also really good place to start. It's great if you're having a reading slump. That's another good time to pick up Tress of the Emerald Sea, because it's got such a heart to it. The story has heart, and sometimes we just want to root for a character and have, just no other thoughts about it. We don't need to always have these morally gray characters. Sometimes we just want somebody to root for, and that's what we get here with Tress. And that's going to get me to my one for the road today. And if you are brand new to the channel, I do this at the end of every episode, and I call it one for the road, and it's just kind of my last parting thoughts on whatever the topic of the day is. And today, we're going to talk about timing is everything, all right? I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. Now, you may be saying, Brian, you're gushing about this book. Why wouldn't you give it 5 stars? I don't really know. A 5-star book for me is pretty rare, and it has to spark something that in every single circumstance that I would read the book, it would be a 5-star. Sometimes it's how it's structured. Sometimes it's the crazy, cool endings and just the author's deft skill. There's a lot of reasons why I give a book a 5-star, or I should say there are a multitude of reasons why something can qualify for 5-star for me, but most don't. When I think a book is just really great, it ends up at about a 4.5, and that's where I'm putting Tress. And our one for the road is all about timing is everything. I think for me, this book, had I read this even 3 months ago, even 2 months ago, it probably would have been about a 4, maybe a 4.25. But it is absolutely getting the extra kind of nudge just because the timing of this book is exactly what I needed. Now, I am very famously not a mood reader. I am a TBR reader. I make TBRs that are usually about, a year out. Sometimes we'll do every quarter, and then I'll film that, and we'll talk about what we're going to do over the next 3 months. But I am not really a mood reader, and this book has taught me that timing is everything when it comes to our reading. And I think that there's some value here for you insofar as if you can afford it, if you can keep a few books around the place that you live that bring in different moods for when you inevitably run into them. So keep a book like Tress of the Emerald Sea around for a time that maybe you need a little bit of lighthearted hope and kind of a warm hug through a novel. Maybe keep some scary books around if you feel like there's some times you need some adrenaline. Maybe keep some big epic fantasy books or big, space opera books around for when you really want to give your mind the ability to wrap its head around something major and complex. timing is everything. And if we have those things in our library, on our shelves, maybe think of them as almost like going to the grocery store and you're filling your pantry with ingredients. You might not know when you're going to need that flour, right? You might not know when you're going to use that black pepper, but some point you're going to have a recipe that you're in the mood for, and it's a good thing you have those in the pantry because now you don't have to go out looking for it. You've already set yourself up for success. That's my one for the road today. I would really like to know in the comments, are there some books that for you hit at the exact perfect time you needed to read them? I'd love to know that because I do curate quite a bit of my TBR mountain. I add to my Goodreads a lot by the comments and the suggestions that you guys leave below. I didn't even mention to like this video, so I should probably do that right now. If you like this kind of video, if you think that my vibe is something that you might be able to jibe with, think about hitting the subscribe button as well. We are trying to grow the channel here. That's what I've got for you guys today. Tress of the Emerald Sea is a big win. Stay positive, everybody. And of course, here's your fortune.